In this lesson, we'll be taking a look at some additional slot techniques that you may need when building your Vue app. So the first barrier when it comes to using slots is what happens when you need multiple slots. For example, if you have a component that's responsible for managing the blog layout, but needs to render out flexible content in the header, main content, and aside, your first instinct might be to write your component like this, where you have the header, main, and aside HTML elements with a slot in the middle. And so you may be thinking that this will then correspond to the individual areas. And when we think about how the blog layout will be used, we might imagine that our H1 would go into the header slot, the P tag will go into the main slot, and the unordered list will go into the aside. However, as you might imagine, right now there's no way of instructing Vue which slot it's supposed to go into, so it's going to be confused. As a result, enter name slots. To use name slots, we provide our slot with the attribute of name, and then whatever slot name that we desire. In this case, we'll call it header. And for our aside slot, we'll name it sidebar. However, even though we've just given our slot some names, in app.vue, our blog layout content still has no explicit directions on where it should live, so it's all going to still show up in the same place. To fix this, we'll need the template block. Just like we use in single file components, we can use the template element to break up our content into individual blocks, which we'll use to show which slot the content should appear in. In order to do that, we'll need to learn about a new directive called v-slot. The way it works is we start with our template element, and then just like our other directives, we add our VSlot Directive, and then it takes an argument, which is the slot name that we want the template to go to. As you might guess, the slot name provided to the VSlot Directive should correspond to the slot name attribute that we define inside of our component. Unlike other directives though, one caveat to remember is that the VSlot Directive should only be used on the template element. In addition, in the event you need to programmatically set your slot name, this can be achieved by wrapping the slot name variable in square brackets. To compare and contrast the two, here's what it looks like when you're just using a static string to define the vslot slot name versus when we want Vue to interpolate our slot name as a JavaScript variable. Equipped with this knowledge now, let's apply this to our blog layout example. In this updated example, I've gone ahead and wrapped all of the different sections inside their own template blocks. Now, let's go ahead and apply what we just learned with the VSlot directive by defining the vslot header for our page title. Then we'll go ahead and define a vslot sidebar for our unordered list. With our vslots properly defined, our page title will now go into the appropriate slot, as well as our unordered list. And some of you may be wondering, how about this middle section? Since it doesn't have an explicit name, it will by default go into whatever slot is left over. And just so you know, any slot without an explicitly defined name will be given the name default. So in the event you want it to be explicit, you could just write it out like this and it works just the same. And if not, you're always welcome to omit it as well. Like our other directives vbind and von, you might be wondering, is there a shorthand for vslot? And there is. Similar to how vbind has a colon and von has the @ symbol, the vslot shorthand is the £. However, even though I love the shorthand for vbind and von, I personally prefer being more explicit with my vslot since the £, has a lot of different meanings in front end and could be confused when new developers might be joining a new codebase. As a result, when possible, I recommend that most teams stick with the vslot longhand. And with that, you can now manage more than one slot inside of a component while also being able to programmatically set your slot names if necessary. I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson when we tackle a powerful but complex topic, scope slots. See you there.